I'm really hearing from immigrants' rights colleagues that we want faith communities to step up right now.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush in New York City.
We need you all to step up even more and to have that prophetic, bold witness in a way that's, taps into that moral platform.
It's no surprise that the press seems obsessed with any conflict taking place in American cities and tends to follow a narrative of lawlessness versus law and order. But we're not living in that kind of simplistic world right now. We need to look to deep moral values and beliefs to discern who we need to support and what is really happening on the ground. Deep in the work of defiance and defending the weak are many faith leaders that are standing up right now in Los Angeles in the current situation with ICE and the immigrant communities. One of the top organizers is Reverend Noel Andersen, a pastor in the United Church of Christ, and he is also the National Field Director for Church World Service and at the forefront of empowering congregations to provide sanctuary, advocate for policy change, and stand in prophetic resistance. This week, Noel is my guest on The State of Belief. After we finish that interview, you will hear my words that I offered at the Faith Rally for a Moral Budget in Washington, D.C. on June 10th. I was among the hundreds of faith and lay leaders gathered at the U.S. Capitol. With me were Interfaith Alliance of Iowa Executive Director Connie Ryan and the Reverend Heather Wackendorf, and they were talking about how the moral budget was playing out in Iowa, and you will not want to miss their conversation.
This Memorial Day, from Paulist Productions and executive producer Chris Pratt comes Fighting Spirit, a combat chaplain's journey. The gripping true story of former U.S. Army chaplain Justin Roberts. Through the powerful stories from the 419 chaplains who gave their lives in service, including Army chaplain Father Emil Capon, whom Pope Francis brought one step closer to sainthood, and Roberts' emotional journey, Fighting Spirit, a combat chaplain's journey, brings a stirring tribute to courage, faith, and sacrifice, from the front lines to today. Pre-order now on Apple TV or visit fightingspiritfilm.com.
We need voices like Reverend Andersen to be heard now more than ever. So please make sure that you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Our library of past conversations includes well over 100 empowering and inspiring interviews with guests like Bishop William Barber, Dr. Najiba Saeed, filmmaker Rob Reiner, Rabbi Sharon Brous, and so many others. You can also help grow The State of Belief with a financial contribution today. Find out how at stateofbelief.com, and you can support and join us in the work of Interfaith Alliance at interfaithalliance.org. And now to my guest. Reverend Noel Andersen is a faith-based organizer, advocate, and national field director for Church World Service, where he leads efforts to build sanctuary and solidarity networks across the United States. An ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, he is also a longtime champion for immigrant rights. Reverend Andersen works at the intersection of faith and justice, mobilizing religious communities to resist unjust immigration enforcement, including ICE raids in Los Angeles and beyond. So you can imagine why I wanted so badly to talk to Reverend Andersen today. Reverend, welcome to The State of Belief.
Thank you so much, Paul, for having me on, and I'm so glad to be part of The State of Belief. I listen to your show, and I'm a big fan of Interfaith Alliance, so thank you for all the great work you're doing. It's so important, and it's an honor to be here with you.
Well, thank you. And, let's start where we need to start, which is you have been on the ground in Los Angeles over the last days, week. What have you seen Because those of us who are abroad, more and more, I'll just say, this is going to be a nationwide issue. This is not a Los Angeles problem. This is a nationwide problem. But those of us who are not close to Los Angeles are only getting what our media feeds are telling us. I would love for you to give a firsthand accounting of the way you understand what has happened in Los Angeles over the last week.
Definitely, I'd be happy to tell you my experience. And I should start out by saying that, I work at the national level. I'm a field organizer, as you mentioned, on our advocacy team throughout the country. But, I live here in Orange County in the LA area where my wife's family is from. We moved here because that's where the grandparents are to help take care of our kids. But my wife actually used to be an organizer at Clergy Lady United for Economic Justice, and I've been a longtime follower of their work and collaborator with their work on sanctuary movement. And so I've been doing as much as I can that they have asked faith leaders and volunteers to do over the last several weeks. And it is a very overwhelming what is going on here in the Los Angeles area. And it extends beyond just the city proper. I was out at the Orange County courts. And one of the things that led to where we're at right now is not just workplace raids, but also these essentially what are raids at the courthouses. So, we got there was about 15 of us clergy. We go in and some of us are in the court, some of us are in the waiting room. And suddenly, some of the rapid response network of Orange County organizers are explaining to us that these people in plain clothes are actually ICE agents. And they're sitting there waiting for asylum seekers to have a court dismissal. Now, asylum seekers would have the potential to actually challenge their case if they have a denial. But a lot of times they're even detaining people whose cases were extended, we've heard. And so, when people come out of their courtrooms, ICE is there waiting for them, and they detain them and then bring them out the back door in an unmarked cars. They put masks over their faces, and a lot of times the wives and children or husbands are there accompanying their family member, so they're seeing their family member. And this has been happening throughout the country, these essentially what are court raids.
It just feels like these people are doing the right thing. They're doing what they've been told to do. The structure told them to show up here and do this thing so that you can be a part of American society. They are actually obeying laws. It makes no sense to me when you talk about law and order, and yet these people are following the law and order, and yet they're being basically abducted from that process. So, those of us who are not Native American or African descendants from enslaved people, we all have a story about arriving in this country. And, some of my ancestors were refugees from a hostile, in fact, from the monarchy in Austria. And that's what this country, when we tell a story that is good about this country, there is asylum, and we have the Statue of Liberty, and all of those things. And so here we are.
To add to that, they've essentially ended the asylum program at this point. It's in the courts, but they've suspended indefinitely the refugee program. And so my organization, Church World Service, has had to sue, and they still want to resettle Afrikaners. So we know that the resettlement program works, but instead they're choosing to apply it to a population that has actually traditionally been on the side of the oppressor in terms of apartheid, rather than those who have actually been marginalized and had to flee their lives because they have been fighting for human rights, which is so many of the people who are part of the refugee program.
Yeah. So let's zoom out a little bit. And because you were part of a broader clergy network, what were you hearing about what was happening in Los Angeles writ large? ICE was there, but from what I can understand and piece together, they were coming in using kind of all the trappings of the Iraq war, this incredible escalation of a kind of presence, and meant to intimidate, meant to provoke. How were you talking about it? And you must have when did you first notice something was shifting? Like, what day was that? And can you just give us a little bit of the chronology of the last week?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, things were escalating also at the LA courts and really the courts throughout the Southern California around these sort of courthouse raids. And so has been happening for the last 2 weeks. And that was really getting, immigrants' rights organizers, there's a rapid response networks between clergy and immigrants' rights groups throughout the region. And so, people were really on alert by the time the Paramount workplace raids came about. And then what you mentioned there, there does seem to be a sense, rolling into a, heavily immigrant, heavily Latino neighborhood where, of course, the garment district is a very important economic engine for the region. And with all of that seemingly military gear, I mean, I think to all of us, it appeared that this was a planned way to try to get a robust response from organizers in the Los Angeles area.
Mm-hmm.
And that they were, this plan, was something that was, trying to elicit a harsh reaction, which it clearly did. And,
Yeah.
this has a huge ripple effect across the community. I mean, there's a million undocumented people in this region, and all of those people have families, and
Yeah.
those families are impacted, and those communities are impacted. So, they're not just going to sit by and watch these things happen, right? And
Yeah.
and a lot of the young people, it is true. Yeah, a lot of the young people have reacted out of anger. And I personally, as a person with faith, can't blame them for that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But what I have also seen, as and for me, it really became clear, Friday afternoon, Saturday, what was really starting to take place here, and these massive mobilizations. And so, one of the things we've seen is, where there are, organizers with the immigrants' rights groups, Chirla and the Service Employee International Union, David Huerta, the president of the local union here for construction, was arrested wrongfully, and he's got some serious charges he's fighting. And so there was a huge rally. Dolores Huerta was speaking, and the Clue clergy were up on the stage
Yeah.
praying, and he was released, I believe, that afternoon. I think though David Huerta's case shows just what's really going on there. And then that same day on Monday, a group of us, about 30 clergy and from really all traditions, did march down and confront LAPD and National Guard. And what we saw there was, because we had a peaceful approach, because we were singing songs and chanting things that were in line with our message to welcome immigrants, to set the families free, to stop the deportations, and we kneeled and prayed, and clergy took turns coming to the front to speak, and we sang songs while holding hands. I think there was at least some respect perhaps from LAPD, but shockingly, they did roll out a whole nother, I would say, 30 LAPD. And one of the points Pastor Q from Clue made was that, why is the LAPD protecting the National Guard? So we couldn't actually approach National Guard in that moment that was surrounding the courthouse. Remember what I told you about the courthouses? So National Guard is essentially protecting ICE so they can go in and do these apprehensions in the courthouse. And so here we are looking at the National Guard from afar and, saying, well, this is supposed to be a sanctuary city. So why is the LAPD cooperating with National Guard and essentially with ICE to be able to do
Yeah.
these apprehensions?
What do you
Sure.
think is the specific role that clergy played in that moment? Because I think that's one of the things that's so important, is that religion and the presence of religious people, there were some really important moments that we saw that felt like it had the potential to shift some dynamics. Have you been able to see that?
I most definitely would say that that has happened in these efforts. I mean, I should also say, and I think we all, from a faith perspective, agree that violence, like we've been seeing in some of these new clips, are not helpful. They're not the solution, right? They're not going to move things forward, and sometimes people could get hurt, and we really don't want that. Sort of graffiti, those types of things. Those things don't help our broader cause. And as I mentioned, though, I do understand, like if I'm a young person and my family member is detained, where that anger is coming from.
Right.
But I think that what we've seen, and I will say with the faith communities, faith leaders alongside, immigrants' rights, union leaders have really changed the organizing efforts around this and made it more peaceful, made it more directed towards our message, and really steered the conversation and national dialogue in a different direction. And I think that the faith voice, the moral voice, people still do respect and understand the value of it. And one of the things, I've been in the immigrants' rights space for a little over 20 years, I might say, and you know, I'm really hearing from immigrants' rights colleagues that we want faith communities to step up right now, and we need you all to step up even more and to have that prophetic, bold witness in a way that's, taps into that moral platform.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting right now that what we've been noticing, and you probably are aware of this, is just recently the there have been kind of attacks on some of the by attacking the status, the IRS status, of NGOs that deal with immigration. So, and that includes like the Catholic bishops, Catholic charities, a lot of organizations that have been, faith groups that are doing this out of their mission, out of their sense of calling. And this is, there are groups from all different traditions. One of the things I loved about the what I saw from these clergy lines was it wasn't just one kind of clergy. There were all different kinds of clergy who were showing up from all different spaces. But what is this is a pattern for this administration. Attack any religious group that isn't in lockstep with you. So when we talk about religious freedom, it means nothing because actually religious freedom isn't supposed to be only for the people who you agree with. They're attacking all of these groups, and I'm just curious how that is landing as you talk about, wanting more religious communities to step up, and I think you're absolutely right. And at the same time, there is a clear attack by the administration against religious groups that are stepping up.
Well, yes, thank you for mentioning that. I mean, it is a very difficult moment in that regard, and I know a lot of, and I haven't confirmed yet if Church World Service is on that letter list, but a lot of my colleague partner organizations are, and it's clearly an intimidation tactic.
Right.
And there's a lot of First Amendment issues going on here, including the right to religious practice, and we've seen, for example, in the sanctuary movement, an important leader, Jeanette Viscara, get detained on her shift break at Target where she was working, and she didn't even have a deportation order. So there's a real question of due process there. And the ICE agent said to her, "We finally got you."
Oh, wow.
When they picked her up. And so what we see here is, we see that with the green card holders on Palestinian rights, that there's an effort to use immigration as a way to shut down people's ability to speak out. And the broader picture, I know we talked about even before the recording started, is that this administration is using immigration as a way to destabilize democracy as part of a broader plan to chip away at our democratic functions and systems. And it seems to me to be a playbook towards, some kind of takeover or some kind of dictatorship. Now, going back to this religious freedom question, as faith communities, I think we still have that moral responsibility to speak out. As a sanctuary movement leader, that's been harder also because of the sensitive locations memo being rescinded.
Right.
And I want to talk more about that. But we've seen that, the governor of Texas, Abbott, he has set forth a lot of these plans that the administration is essentially utilizing, right? So if we look to what's been happening for the last 4 years in Texas, we can see some of the things that will keep moving forward. So with the Annunciation House, a Catholic affiliated organization that is a shelter and has been doing amazing work for decades on sheltering migrants from coming through the border, food and providing place for them. And they have been under attack by Governor Abbott and Ken Paxton. And right now that's in the state Supreme Court, and the Annunciation House is using a RFRA claim. They're using the
Sure.
Religious Freedom Restoration
Yeah.
Act claim. We're using the RFRA claim, or I should say Georgetown Law is using the RFRA claim in the sensitive locations
Yeah.
memo lawsuit. And so, when we look at the harboring laws, which are in fact quite vague, there's no Supreme Court ruling on harboring laws versus the RFRA laws. Now they have clear Supreme Court, and I could go into some of the rulings I disagree with there, but what we see is that RFRA's much stronger language, and that we will probably see in the next 4 years coming to head around religious leaders following their faith, and this administration trying to criminalize it.
And I want to talk a little bit about what is happening already in LA. There's been a couple incidences of, when we talk about sensitive spaces, of ICE going onto property that is church property, and in some really scary images that have come out. And again, I think that is just the beginning of what we're going to see a lot more of is churches where people may just be coming to pray. They may not even be using it as a sanctuary space, but just because it's their community and they want to pray and they want to be part of a community, a religious community, and ICE is going to target those, which to me again seems like a terrible attack on religion, but it's already been happening in Los Angeles. What are some of the things you've been hearing about those events, and how is that being processed by the community in Los Angeles?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, when we talk about sensitive locations, the idea that ICE or Border Patrol shouldn't be going into houses of worship, shouldn't be going into hospitals or schools. I mean, this is a policy that's gone back 30 years, even before ICE with INS and over many administrations from different parties. So we see this chill effect happening as a result of the sensitive locations being rescinded. And what that meant was that a lot of people weren't going to their house of worship when
Right.
that
I mean,
when that came
it has
down.
resulted in terrible sense of I can't risk going to pray. I can't risk being part of my community. And I just think that that's where it really is infringing on people's ability to practice their religion openly and freely, and it's terrible. People are forced to hide, and of course, just to rant for a second, a lot of times they cloak themselves in this great Christian crusade that they feel they're a part of, and yet they're attacking people of all faith traditions, including Christians. Including, I would say, Catholics, evangelical Latinos. It's really I'm just wondering, how is the religious community writ large responding to this? I mean, the Catholic Church, we kind of think of them as middle of the road, maybe a little more conservative on a lot of issues, especially the white Catholic Church, but there's got to be a sense of why are we being singled out so often by this administration?
Yeah, and I think there is a broader uprising from faith communities that feel the ICE and this administration is going after them.
Yeah.
And I think there's there's a balance, talked about protecting democracy. A balance I think that a lot of faith institutions are challenged with right now is the sense of we have to continue to speak out, right? That's part of protecting democracy. But we also have to protect our institutions and making sure that our civic society institutions maintain their statuses is also really important to protect democracy. And so I think a lot of institutions feel like they're walking a tightrope
Yeah.
between those different approaches. And but we have seen, there are 3 cases right now on sensitive locations with faith communities suing the administration for the rescission. And one of those has 27 religious groups.
Yeah, but even the one, that Democracy Forward put forward is very diverse. It has the Cooperative Baptists,
Yeah.
and the Sikh
Right.
Coalition and the
Yeah.
Quaker Friends. And that's
Yeah.
very, for the Cooperative Baptists, by the way, which is not a radical organization. That is that's a very middle of the road, but they see so many of their people. It's like a pastoral need, we have to protect our people. I think that's
Yes.
where that comes out of a pastoral
Right.
concern for the people in our churches.
Right, exactly. And, our first American Pope, as a cardinal, also spoke out on the issue of immigration. So, and I think that's because it impacts so many of their members.
Pope Leo is pretty clear about this stuff.
Exactly.
And also, I will say, in some of the interfaith prayer vigils that at least I saw advertised, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles was listed as one of
That's
the
right.
sponsors. And so,
Yeah.
I feel like,
And that vigil had about 1,000 people at it.
isn't that
Yeah.
amazing? So that's these are stories that people need to hear about. If you keep on repeating the one image of a couple self-driving cars on fire and you miss the big interfaith service, you're not telling the
Exactly.
story. So come on, media.
That's right.
Really. But Pope Leo,
Yeah.
I'm kind of just you got anything to say right now? Because this would be a good time to say it.
This would be a good
Wouldn't that
time to say
shift?
it.
I think that could shift a dynamic in a pretty radical way if he just decided, almost casually, we don't approve of what's going on. It would mean a lot to, I think, people, Catholics and non-Catholics alike.
Right. And I think that is a problem with the media, but I also think there's a right-wing media bent to just replay these scenes of violence again and again when overwhelmingly the protests have been peaceful, well organized. And yeah, there are isolated events. And I think that those, are in a lot of ways unfortunate.
Yeah.
And that it's really unfortunate that the media has chosen to really focus in on that only. And so getting
100%.
to this, what has happened at Downey Memorial Christian Church, the
Right.
Disciples of Christ denomination. So all of a sudden I hear yesterday that there was this had happened in this congregation. And so I went, it's about a half an hour drive from me. I went as fast as I could to get to the press conference and got to meet the pastors there and hear their stories in the press conference. And what had happened there was very shocking because, a passerby probably was in their parking lot, and all of a sudden, all these cars roll up. And then they live in their church is a pretty busy intersection. There's a lot of businesses around, so people coming through the parking lot, that happens. And maybe they were trying to find a moment of peace and solace. And all these ICE unmarked vehicles roll up, about 15 ICE agents, with their masks again, in their plain clothes. And the way they disrespect these pastors. One of the pastors, Reverend Al Lopez, says, "This is our property and you need to leave." And guess what ICE says to them? I couldn't believe, because it's completely unconstitutional, which is, he responds, "This whole country is our property."
Really, that is the mindset. That it's crystallized right there. It
really
this
is.
is ours. It's not yours. It's ours, and we get to do what we want. And that, to me says exactly he didn't come up with that. That's a mentality thing that that I hate to say it, but him and many of his colleagues are walking into every situation with that mentality rather than how can we navigate this moment for the country? This is
Exactly.
it's
And they've
ours.
been given that permission
Yeah.
by this administration, President Trump. And I understand Stephen Miller went to ICE just recently and said that ICE needs to deport 3,000 people a day. And
Yeah.
so clearly they don't care about our Constitution and the fact that they need a warrant to go into private places. And that historically this is a sensitive location, whether or not it was rescinded or not.
Up next, much more with Reverend Noel Andersen. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. And you'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts or whatever is your podcast platform. It really helps. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush. My guest is immigrant rights leader, Reverend Noel Andersen. I have heard people say, it's not like deportation started with Trump. I mean, the Biden administration was deporting people, and Obama deported people. And, some people might argue to a greater degree than and it was a problem with them as well. But the idea that you need to do all of this to fulfill this, duty that you supposedly have to deport people. I mean, did I just hear that out of the blue? Or is there you've been doing this, as you said, for 20 years. So none of this is new. It's just that in some ways, the way it's being done and the way it's being, it's part of a broader effort of destabilization of democracy. That part is new.
That part is new. And I mean, a lot of times when the people look at the numbers, they might say, that, Biden was worse or something like this, right? Well, that's just plain not true. And I can explain some of the reasons why, because their policies are completely different. Deportation enforcement, for example, is a pretty easy way to see some of the big differences. And the Obama administration had the same policy, which was priorities set according to the equities of each case. So, rather than saying we want to deport every single person, they said we want to deport people with a criminal background, and there is some sense of what kind of crimes those would actually be, not like a traffic stop, not like a immigration related violation, like using a social in somebody else's social at one point. It's more like violent crimes, theft, car larceny, things like
There
that.
is a fundamental difference between the way this is being operationalized.
Huge difference. And then the other big difference that's kind of shocking is that the Trump administration is the people actually crossing. And I think people are scared. When people saw what happened to people being sent to Salvadoran prisons and Guantanamo, so recent border crossers has always been a big deportation number for the President Obama and for President Biden. Those numbers aren't there for the Trump administration. So they're going into communities.
I gotcha.
And both Biden and Obama did not want to separate families. So actually, families was a positive equity. If you had a citizen child, that's a positive equity. So you're much less likely to get deported if you have those positive equities. So very different policies around deportations and at the border. So, actually people could still claim asylum at the border under both those Democrat presidents, where now they essentially can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me turn to something that you have coming up, which is like totally related. And again, part of my family history, and I think many people's family history, is refugees. And on the June 20th, there is World Refugee Day observation celebration at the White House. What is that day, and what are you going to be doing, and what's the goal, and how can people join in?
Right. And I mentioned previously the importance of the refugee program. This program, in its current state since 1980, Refugee Act has been, here for 45 years, has resettled, somewhere around 3.5 million refugees. And the previous Trump administration tried to dismantle it. We were able to rebuild it under Biden. And now they essentially, and as soon as they got going, they had an executive order to suspend it indefinitely.
Oh,
And there's
wow.
another question again about, well, are they going after sort of undocumented criminals like they claim, or are they going after all legal immigration programs, including the refugee program, which has been a beacon of hope for democracy throughout the globe? And so the Church World Service, highest IRAP, the Immigration and Refugee Assistance Project, we've all sued, and the court has mandated them to start this program again, although they've been very slow in resettling people, but very quick when they decided to resettle Afrikaners. Well, World Refugee Day, June 20th, is a very important day for the refugee community throughout the world, where we really celebrate the value add, the important contributions that refugees
Mm.
bring to our communities. And this year, in the past, we've had, big, big celebratory events at the National Cathedral. But this year, we are instead focused on the advocacy pieces of it. And we are planning a rally in front of the White House to tell the administration and tell this president to restart the refugee program. And
Mm.
we'll have lots of speakers from, faith leaders to refugee agency executives to business leaders, and obviously refugee leaders will be speaking, and people who have been laid off because the administration froze funds to the refugee agencies in the
Right.
first week of the administration. So it's going to be a powerful event, and the RSVP link. We have. It would be great to share with you all that, and then we can send the address where the event will be starting at a nearby church.
And what is
And
the what if there's is there a landing page or a website that people can go to?
yes, Church World Service has a landing page for World Refugee Day as a whole. And on that is our events list. So also events from around the country. So you can find the DC event, but you can also find
That's
other
great.
events. World Refugee Day, we usually have somewhere we track around 100 events, and I think there's always
Oh,
more
wow.
because they're sometimes hard to find or get everyone to register. So, you know, that's something all of our refugee agencies do throughout the different networks. There's 10 refugee agencies. But the majority of them are faith-based. And,
So you can
it's,
really show up, as your full self, as whatever religious tradition that you may come from, or as a secular person that you may come from. I think everybody is welcome. And maybe it's interesting. There is a lot online about World Refugee Day, and so it's a big deal. But if you happen to be in D.C., people should come June 20th. But also, it's an opportunity to reflect, and maybe if you happen to be in conversation with any of your elected leaders, or if you could bring it into your place of worship. I think there's just lots of ways to remind ourselves that refugees are actually trying to build something beautiful alongside those of us who are already here, and they should be viewed as an incredibly welcome part of our broader society and our democracy. I think one of the terrible things, among many terrible things that Trump and the wider administration has done, is to cast immigrants and to cast refugees as dangerous, hostile, other, threatening, and to be eradicated almost. I mean, it's really terrible. And I would like root this in this idea of the Great Replacement theory, or I mean, which we've talked about on this show, but it was worth bringing up. It's it has anti-Semitic roots, that there's an effort to replace white people, white Christians, with brown people that are foreigners, and people who have literally shot up and murdered the Tree of Life. We're looking at the Great Replacement theory, and it's part of this white Christian nationalist framework of this is what all of this country is ours. I mean, this idea of this is a white Christian, and we can add male, straight, whatever, country, and I just think that that's like an important reminder when we talk about what's happening in LA, when we talk about the deploying, it's crazy that Stephen Miller is like, but there's a lot of that in this architecture, right? So I just would love
completely.
it if you talk a lot about that from your perspective as someone who really works in this community. I am a cheerleader, and love what you're doing, but you're on the ground. How does this all play out in real time in your work?
Well, it's very hectic. I want to hit on this piece that a lot of the pivot for immigration groups, refugee groups, is around the protect democracy work, because the type of replacement theory and white Christian nationalism you mentioned, that is part of the authoritarian playbook.
Right.
And they have to have a scapegoat. They have to have a reason to take away the rights of citizens, or else citizens won't stand for it. So they create and manufacture a national security crisis when there isn't one, calling immigrants foreign invaders. And then they talk about wanting to take away habeas corpus and the possibility of sending citizens to Salvadoran prisons.
It's wild. And, by the way, all of this is Constitution. They're taking away the Constitution. None of this is like, Noel and Paul making up ideas of what might be nice to have. No, this is actually what we're talking about is all rooted in the Constitution. It's guaranteed to everyone living in this country. And it's not just guaranteed, frankly, to those who get to call themselves citizens, whatever that means, but also anyone in this country deserves habeas corpus. It's not this is part of the Constitution, people. I mean, really, that's what we're at. It's like this is Constitution. What do we really want in this country? Do we want people just to throw that document out? It's just I just feel like we're in such a dangerous time, and it does make me feel so much better to have you on the front lines, but also all the faith leaders. I mean, it's just meant so much to me to be able to, as I'm doom scrolling, I'm like, oh, look, yes, that's, faith leaders are showing up. And then you see everywhere. Really big numbers, right?
And a testimony of hope is some of the courage of some of these faith leaders. Reverend Tanya Lopez, it's a co-pastor married couple at Downey Memorial Church. So she also went out to confront ICE, and there's a video of her saying, you need to let this person go. You need to get off our property. And to confront all of these large men with masks and guns.
Right.
And her daughters were even in the background.
Wow.
And she was trying to explain the rights to this person of, you don't have to tell them anything. You don't have to sign anything.
Right.
Like know your rights information. And they told her to back up and even pointed a gun.
No, we saw that. Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable.
So,
it's unbelievable.
I think this is, where things on the ground, every day are evolving. and we have to try to evolve with it. And so that's where rapid response press conference is the reason why it's in the New
Right.
York Times. And I think, adapting to what ICE is doing is a constant struggle, and also adapting to the way the administration is attacking our civic society is a constant struggle,
Mm.
but one that we, have a moral responsibility to respond and try to strategize together, try to build not only the rapid response work, but also think about the medium term agenda, the long term vision. What is it that we want to see, not just in 1 month, but several years, 5 years, 10, 20 years. And that part of the work sometimes gets lost, but it's just as
Yeah.
important.
Um, you know, a lot of people listening to this show have heard me. It's now become kind of a mantra of mine. We had Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum on, who is just an amazing person, and she said nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And that is like a super important idea where, no one is the only hero in this story that is, tasked with everything. But also no one is, really, none of us can take a permission slip. I mean, we can all take a moment to rest. We can all, absent when it feels important for our well-being. But what is the one thing you would like our listeners to imagine doing, especially around issues of this moment with ICE, immigration, refugees? What is the one thing you would like for everybody to consider doing?
Well, I think all of us struggle in this moment, right? We all feel like we're not all doing enough. But if we all put our grain of sand in, it makes a huge difference.
Mm.
And uh, I think that for me, I when it comes to immigration and refugee issues, I always tell people of faith in particular to make sure that you're developing relationships with
Mm.
people in the community. So if there is, and sometimes, a lot of times, that does also start with connecting with a local organization in your area, whether it's a refugee agency or a service agency or immigrants' rights organization, and trying to learn and the stories and actually know some of the people, because I think when we root our work in the experience of impacted leaders, it really helps shape our work in the right direction to try to take leadership and understand the voices of those people are what really matter. And then as allies, and of course people of faith, may also come from impacted communities, and so, I think it's always important to make sure that those communities are being lifted up and that we're part of lifting those communities up. But I think starting small, like you said, doing some volunteer work, doing some accompaniment work, and as you progress, uh, doing some advocacy where, a lot of times we have events where you can go visit your congressperson in your
Yep.
district when they're on recess, you're calling them, and then also moving to some of these more maybe advanced, you might say, things of accompaniment and courts, of getting out on the streets. And I always recommend that, when you are doing those actions, especially in this day and age, that you do that, with trusted organizations, that understand the broader strategy and messaging, because we are seeing a lot of folk who might be off message, and sometimes that can
Yeah.
do more damage than good. But I think those building those relationships, starting small, and building out where you can with the time you have.
Reverend Noel Andersen is National Field Director for Church World Service, building sanctuary and solidarity networks across the United States. He's an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. You can find out more about the work at Church World Service. Noel, thank you so much for taking time with us on the State of Belief and for all that you're doing and for all of the community is doing in Los Angeles and across the country. We really appreciate you.
Well, I so appreciate you and all that you are doing with the State of Belief and Interfaith Alliance. So keep up the great work and look forward to working with you more in the future.
Another urgent initiative is the call for a moral budget, which was expressed in a faith rally at the nation's capital on June 10th. You heard organizer Reverend Jim Wallace go in-depth about this event a few weeks ago on The State of Belief, and I was proud to take part in person. You're going to listen to me talk about what I think is important in that budget, in addition to the cuts to Medicaid, to the cuts to SNAP programs to feed children, is also the National Voucher Scheme, which takes money out of public schools across the country.
Hello, everybody. My name is Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush. I'm the president of Interfaith Alliance and a Baptist minister, but I'm keeping it to 2 minutes today. I am also the father of 2 public school children, and today I want to talk about the National Voucher Bill, which in addition to cuts to Medicaid, in addition to cuts to SNAP, they are trying to take money out of our public schools. This national voucher scheme is an attack on public schools, and let there be no doubt, they are trying to destroy public schools. This is a huge tax giveaway to the wealthy who can use a little more money to send their kids to private schools they were already sending their kids to and take it out of public schools. This is bringing it into, imagine private schools where they can actually deny people on the basis of disability status, on the basis of religion, on the basis of race, on the basis of poverty. This is a terrible thing. Public schools will accept everyone. They are made for everyone to come together, to be together. This voucher program will harm rural people, especially poor students, and are, again, a means to destroy public education instead of being a place where public schools can be a place, and my children are testimony to this, where we can come together, learn from each other, be with one another, and build a democracy together. There are also voucher programs, and I want to say this to our senators, and I encourage everyone who's going in there today to tell them, immensely unpopular. In red state after red state, voucher bills have been defeated, bipartisan. This is another part of an immoral bill that is trying to give more to the rich, take away the poor, take away our infrastructure. I encourage all of us to stand up for all people as people of God and say no to the national voucher scheme.
After that, I had a conversation with 2 leaders who came to Washington all the way from Iowa, and I'd like to share that with you now. Okay, this is Paul Raushenbush, and I am in Washington, D.C. We just got finished with an amazing Pentecost vigil for a moral budget that happened, and I am here with 2 amazing women who came out from Iowa. Connie Ryan, who is the executive director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. Yay! And Reverend Heather Wackendorf, who is a local pastor in Iowa. Yay! And we're just kind of doing a little bit of a debrief, and I wanted to share that time with you because, you know, it was a pretty amazing vigil. So let me start with you, Connie, and just, why did you want to come out here, and what was your experience of the vigil?
It was really important to me to be part of the conversation because we know that what is happening at the federal level and the reduction of services and things that the government is supposed to be doing to help everyday Iowans, everyday people across the country, all of that is being reduced. And so we wanted to lend our voice as Iowans, which is so critically important in the middle of the country, and particularly because our Senator Ernst, has said some very egregious things that could really impact
For those of our listeners who don't remember exactly what she said, can you remind us of just the craziness?
Yeah, so she was in a town hall a couple of weeks ago, and somebody was challenging her on the Medicaid portion of the legislation, the quote "big beautiful bill," and she said, "Well, we're all going to die anyway." When somebody was saying that reducing Medicaid could cause some people to die, and of course that was bad enough. And then she doubled down on an edited recording defending herself. It was supposed to be an apology, and it ended up being even worse and invoking Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior exclusively, and the rest of us can just follow along.
And if you all didn't see it, she's walking through a cemetery.
Yeah, exactly.
It really.
Yeah.
I mean, SNL level stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So it was, for me, as the director of Interfaith Alliance, and personally standing up for people who need access to Medicaid, who need access to SNAP, and also opposing vouchers across our country. So that's where I came from, and I was delighted to come at the invitation of you and your staff. And Reverend Walkendorf might have a different viewpoint.
Yeah, I love being in spaces where there is a shared call to action, and standing at that vigil with Methodists and Episcopals and Presbyterians and Baptists and every other mainline and all these other congregation members. It was laity, it was clergy, and it was everybody saying, America can do better. We as people of faith, even though we might understand God and speak to God and express our understanding of God in different ways, we all recognize this moral obligation to do better. As an American people, we can do better. And so it was just so incredibly empowering to stand there in the shadow of the Capitol and to be shoulder to shoulder with people from across the country and to say, you know what, this bill, what was the kill the bill? That was the thing. And I don't like that term necessarily, but I love the sentiment that we all said, this isn't what America needs. Yeah. And so to be able to be there with all these different representations of faith and to just say that together and to chant and sing together, there's just power in that.
Yeah, it was really powerful. If you haven't seen any images of it, I encourage you listeners to go and check it out, because it was big. We had 400, 500, 600 people from literally all around the country who came in, faith leaders, and there wasn't even room for everybody to join on the Capitol steps. I mean, it was incredible. You serve a congregation in Iowa, right? So part of your life is pastoring to people. And so I think the important thing to remember is we're talking about a budget and we're here in Washington, but this is about everyday people and how they're able to live well and whether they have food, health care, a good school that everyone is welcome at. So, how do you connect this with your pastoral duties?
Well, the people that are going to be most impacted by these cuts are the people on either end of life spectrum. It's going to be the children who are not going to get the health care they need, and it's going to be the seniors who rely on Medicaid. And, congregations represent the spectrum of humanity. Mm. And so when you look at a church, you see the people who are I see the people who are going to suffer. And we do a food closet, and we try and feed people knowing that the SNAP program as it isn't even enough. Mm. So to see people who are so divorced from it. We were in an office today speaking with a senator's representative, and I said, do you know that if you go to a food pantry in Des Moines, you can only get 3 days worth of food for an entire month? Once a month, you get to go and get 3 days worth of food for everybody in your family. I said, did you know that? And he said, no. That's why we need SNAP.
And let's talk about that, because part of the plan for you all to come out here was to, be part of the vigil and be part of that great group, but also to talk to your senators and their staff and let them know how Iowans feel What was your reception? I mean, have the senators been hearing from Iowans? What kind of reception did you receive?
We were able to talk with staff from both Senator Grassley and Senator Ernst's office, and they knew we were coming to talk about Medicaid and SNAP and the H.R. 1 bill, and there was a lot of pushback on what we were saying. I said to them at one point that, we're hearing from a lot of Iowans who are unhappy with this bill and understand the impact that it is going to have. And we received quite a bit of pushback from the staffers for that. But I will say that one of the staffers in Grassley's office did indicate that if it was clear that Medicaid and SNAP were going to result in cuts of service to Iowans, that Senator Grassley would vote no. So that was hopeful. The Senate has not seen the actual bill yet, so it will depend on what is in the legislation and what is brought over from the House, but that was hopeful, and we will certainly hold Senator Grassley's feet to the fire, so to speak, on that. Senator Ernst's staffer was a little bit more unclear of where she thought the senator would go on it, but it was a difficult conversation. It was a frustrating conversation because there were not a lot of was not a lot of agreement of particularly what the House bill does and doesn't do, and the nonpartisan assessment of it. So there's a lot of work to do, and we encourage folks to continue to voice their opinions. I know that they've heard from a lot of Iowans, those particular senators and other senators from across the nation. And so Iowans, as well as all Americans who believe this is the wrong way to go, need to make calls and send emails and voice their opposition to the legislation.
I think that's really important, is that I think sometimes it's well, what can I do? It's well, the first thing you can do is talk to your representative, you know what I mean? And let them know, because it actually does matter. Right. You mentioned that they had heard from Iowans, and that they had heard from Iowans that, Iowans weren't particularly happy.
And we could really tell there was a lot of frustration because they have heard from so many Iowans in opposition. And so that kind of painted the picture for us of it is working. Whether or not they're going to, in the end, vote the way that we think that they should is a different story. But we have to keep using our voices. Otherwise, they have no reason not to make the wrong choice, right? And so we want them to oppose the legislation, at least as it comes from the House. And Iowans have a role to play to make sure that they know where we stand. We stand in support of making sure that Medicaid and SNAP are solvent and our people are able to access those services. Yeah.
Reverend Heather, let me ask you, what is going to be your takeaway story from this whirlwind tour of D.C.? And, I'm wondering what you will tell your congregation, what you'll tell your friends back in Iowa about what you experienced, and maybe give us a final word of hope from the pastor from Iowa.
I think standing shoulder to shoulder with other people, it's just a reminder that none of us are in this fight alone. We are surrounded by people, regardless of what media soundbite you hear. The press is going to lean into the stuff that sensationalizes, but we just need to lean into our belief that good people are out there doing good things, and we need to be one of them. We need to be the ones that are finding the allies, making the phone calls, sending the letters, and not stopping. They're annoyed. Well, maybe it's time that they start listening to the people instead of the administration.
Well, I want to thank both of you for all of your work, and especially thank Interfaith Alliance of Iowa for this incredible partnership. We are, grateful for all the work you're doing on the ground and this great collective that we are all a part of really trying to lift up the voices of the people in our democracy and recognize that faith has something to say to our democracy, and faith that is inclusive and welcoming and recognizes diversity and celebrates diversity, but also recognizes that the people have needs that need to be met by the government, and they can't abdicate their responsibility. So thank you both for joining us on The State of Belief and for being here in D.C. with us.
Thank you, Paul. We
Thanks.
so appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate being here.
Interfaith Alliance of Iowa is one of our oldest affiliates, but chapters are located across the country, and new ones are getting started all the time. To find the Interfaith Alliance chapter in your community or how to start an alliance if there isn't one near you, please visit interfaithalliance.org. Who do you know who would get a lot out of this discussion? Please share The State of Belief with them and be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. We need your help to keep making The State of Belief, so please make a financial contribution today at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Raushenbush on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.